Hello there. After almost 3 years of making videos, this is vlog number 100. Not too bad. We're finally at 100, and for that reason I wanted to make this video in particular special, and I kind of tried. Last weekend, I went to Las Vegas to jump into a 5100 at Bellagio. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a 5100 anywhere in town, and that kind of ruined my plans for what I wanted to do for this vlog. So instead, we had to come up with another plan. And that other plan, which I thought was a cool idea, was to bring it back here, where it all started, Morongo Casino. I played Friday and Saturday. Today is Sunday, so the last 2 days I've spent in this building trying to win some money, and I got in a lot of interesting spots. So those are gonna be the hands for today. However, I still wanted to make this video at least somewhat unique, even if maybe this place isn't unique to the channel. And I thought maybe a cool way of doing that would be to include like an FAQ section at the end of this video. I noticed ever since I started this channel, I've actually never gone in depth as to where I'm from or how I started playing poker or my thoughts on bankroll management and moving up in stakes, etc., etc. Maybe I'll even talk a little bit about my results for this year, at least as far as poker goes. And yeah, I don't know, just give you guys a more in-depth look into my life, at least on a more personal level. It's not something I really do very often. But yeah, I mean, it's video number 100. Maybe it's time to let you guys in a little more than I have the past 2.5 years. But I'm gonna save that for after the session. If you're just here to watch some poker hands, can't say I blame you. Let's go play some cards. All right, guys, here we go for the 100th time. Playing some 5, 10, 20 at Morongo, my home casino, and that's all I gotta say. Let's get into the first hand where I pick up 8-7 suited in middle position. There's a limper in front of me, I make it 70 and get called by the straddler and the limper. Flop comes 9-8-5 and it checks to me. Decent flop, but I just check it back and we see the 6 of hearts on the turn, giving me a straight. Now the straddler leads for 110, but then the player behind him raises to 325. This is somewhat concerning since he could have 10-7, but I'm not folding a straight just yet, so I call, and so does the straddler. River is bad to worse, the 5 of diamonds, bringing in the flush and pairing the board. On top of that, the straddler announces all in for around 1,000, and the other guy calls, so at least I have an easy fold here. Anyway, the straddler says I missed, and the player who called wins it with King 7 of diamonds. In the next one, there's another limp from early position before someone raises to 80. Player on my right calls, and it gets to me on the button with Ace 6 suited. I think calling is fine, but I decide to take the aggressive route and raise it up to 300. Now the player who limped in calls the 300. The player who originally made it 80 folds, and the guy who called the 80 also calls the 300. Interesting developments, but alright, 3 ways to the flop, which comes Jack 10-7 with 2 hearts. Checks to me, and I decide to bet again. I think checking is mostly better, honestly, but starting a bluff here seems fine too. Until I realize that the player across the table only has $150 left. Not surprisingly, he sticks that in there, and then the player on my right calls as well, so I'm just shutting it down unless I improve. Turn is a queen. Check, check. River is a red card, but it's a diamond. Check, check again, and we lose the main pot to ace queen and the side pot to pocket eights. So, nice hand, boys. Later on, the $40 double straddle is on, and we see one limper before looking down at 10s on the button. I make it 150, and then the small blind makes it 700. By the way, the small blind happens to be my roommate, Matt, for those of you guys who remember him. Anyway, it gets back to me, and with around $3,000 stacks, we have a clear call, so that's what I do, and we go to a flop. King Jack 4 is not a good one, but somewhat surprisingly, he checks. I happily check it back, and we see the 5 of clubs on the turn. He checks it a second time, and now I think we have a chance to win this one. I doubt he would be checking a strong hand twice with so many draws available, so I decide to place a small bet of $450 with the intention of laying down the hammer on most river cards. He makes the call, and we get one of the best ones, the 8 of hearts. He checks it a third time, and while I still think he has one pair at best, maybe hands like pocket queens, ace jack, possibly even king queen, and I think all those hands would be in a tough spot against an all-in. I mean, I could easily have a flush, a straight, 2 pair, perhaps a set, all kinds of stuff. So after some thought, I send it in there for $2,200 total, and now it's just time to cross our fingers and wait.
All in.
After a few painful minutes, Matt finally decides to fold. Whew, that was a close one. Also, he later told me he had queens, so nice to get it through. Moving along, in this next hand, I get pocket 8s in middle position, raise it up to $50, and get called by 3 players. Flop comes queen, queen, 6, which checks around, and we see the beautiful 8 of hearts on the turn. Even better, the small blind bets $125, and the straddler calls before it gets to me. I decide to raise right away in hopes that one of these guys has a queen or a flush draw. The button folds, but the small blind and straddler both call. 3 ways to a great river, the 7 of diamonds, bringing in the flush. Small blind checks, straddler checks, and I bet $425. Small blind thinks about it forever before finally calling, and the straddler folds right away. I show it, and he mucks. A few rounds later, I open king 10 and get called by just the straddler. Flop comes 8-6-3 rainbow. He checks. I could have a bunch of strong stuff, so I bet 120, and he calls. Turn is another 6. Definitely a better card for him, so when he checks, I just check it back. And the river is another 3. Now my opponent fires for $230. Okay, I think if he had an 8 or a small pocket pair, he probably wouldn't bet. So I guess he's trying to tell me he's got a 6 or a 3. But he could also have a missed straight draw, like 9-7, 5-7, 5-4. So whatever. I'm going to call. And he mucks. So that was cool. Anyway, this was the last hand for Friday's session, so let's fast forward 24 hours to Saturday where we kick things off with ace-4 of diamonds. There's an early position open to 60, and I'm in the big blind where I decide to make it 300. Calling is fine too, but I think a small suited ace is a good candidate for the occasional adventure. Anyway, the initial raiser calls, and we go to a flop of king 10-7 with a diamond. I continue with a small bet, and he calls. Turn gives me the nut flush draw, so I'm going to keep pretending like I have ace-king or aces with a $700 bet. Once again, my opponent makes the call, so we need some help on the river, which doesn't come. It's the 5 of hearts. Well, if I had a strong hand, I would go all in right about now. So it seems logical to also do that with bad hands once in a while, right? So here we go. I'm all in for around $2,000, fingers crossed once again. And after what seems like forever, my opponent finally decides on a fold. Very nice. A few minutes later, I put on the triple straddle for $80 before the big blind makes it $240. Action gets to me and I've got a suited ace again, but this time I decide to just call. Flop comes ace queen 3, and my opponent bets $375. Nothing to do but call, so that's what I do, and we go to the 7 of clubs on the turn. This time my opponent checks, and I think we can get away with a small bet here, so I throw out 4 black chips, and he calls. River is the 9 of diamonds, and he checks it again. I'm not sure if we're getting called by a worse hand, so I simply turn it over, and my opponent says ace is good. Later on, there's a limp from early position, and I decide to raise on the button with 7-4 suited. Probably a little too wide, but too late. Big blind and straddler call, and the limper folds. The flop instantly rewards my poor play, 6-5-3 rainbow. Wow. Okay, checks to me. I bet half pot, and both of my opponents call. Turn card is pretty lame though, the 7 of diamonds. Small blind checks again, but this time the straddler leads out for $300. I just call, and the small blind folds. River is interesting now, an offsuit 8, meaning any 9 now makes a better straight. This time my opponent thinks for a bit and checks it. It seems to me that we're likely up against another 4, but I don't want to chop this pot. He's got around $1,200 remaining in his stack, and if I move all in, we might be able to represent pocket 9s or 9-8. Between me and you, I probably would have played those hands differently, but whatever, my opponent doesn't know that. So I move all in, and we don't get snap called. That's pretty much all I cared about. Now it just feels like a free roll. Once again, we wait it out, and once again we get a fold. Not only that, but he shows the 4 of hearts in the process. So yeah, this hand went pretty damn well. In the next one, I open the button with ace-king for $50 and get raised by the small blind to 180. I've got some very powerful cards, so I'm going to raise again, this time $550. Now my opponent thinks for a bit and eventually calls, so we're going to go heads up to a flop. 7-6 deuce with 2 diamonds isn't exactly what I had in mind, but when he checks it over to me, I'm going to continue with a small bet, just like I would with any overpair. He makes the call, and we find no help on the turn. This time I decide to check it back, and what do you know? The river is an ace. Small blind checks it again, and even though this card brings in the flush, it seems unlikely he would have one, given that both the ace and king of diamonds are accounted for, and also the fact that he checked it. So I place a value bet of $1,200, and after some thought, he makes the call. I turn it over, and he shows me ace-queen before folding. So obviously running embarrassingly hot right now, but hey, I'll take it anytime. A few rounds later, there's an open from early position to 90, and I defend the straddle with 8-5 suited. Flop comes down jack 6-5 with 1 club. I check it over, and he bets 90 again. I'm definitely not folding with a pair and some backdoor straight and flush possibilities. The question is whether to raise or just call. This opponent in particular is not the type to fold any sort of pair, so I elect to just call, and we find the perfect turn card, an offsuit 5. I check it again, begging my opponent to bet, and bet he does, this time $210. I'm thinking he's got either an overpair, a jack, or perhaps a draw, all of which are probably not folding to a raise, so I make it $800 to go, and he doesn't think too long before calling. The river is not too great, the 3 of spades. However, he's only got around 1,300 behind, and I would hate to check and see him check back an overpair or ace-jack. Like I said, this player is not the type to fold anything strong. I'm just going to move all in and hope he calls with a worse hand. Well, he does call, but it's not with a worse hand. 7-4 of diamonds. Sadly, a straight is better than 3 of a kind, so I lose a bunch of chips. Good hand, sir. Let's see if we can turn things around with pocket 8s. Standard raise to 50, small blind calls, and now the big blind, who's the same player from last hand, makes it 380. Quite a big raise, and from what I know about this player, it's probably aces or kings. So I'm going to make the call and hope to hit a set since we both have plenty behind. Small blind also calls again, so we go 3 ways to a magical flop. 9-8-6. Small blind checks it, and now the pre-flop raiser continues with a bet of $1,500. Yeah, pretty much what dreams are made of. I make the call, and the small blind gets out of the way. Heads up to the turn, which unfortunately brings in the flush, the queen of clubs. However, my opponent is undeterred and says, if you got me, I'm all in, for $4,500. That is a big bet. Does he have pocket queens? Maybe aces with a club? Well, I guess I don't really have a choice either way. If he's got a bigger set or a flush, so be it. I am not folding a hand this strong. So I make the call, and suddenly we have a $13,000 pot with 1 card to come, and that card is the Jack of Diamonds. My opponent announces kings. Whew. Big wave of relief to hear that. I quickly turn it over, and we're going to take down one of the biggest pots I've ever played here at Morongo. Having an absolute dream session now. In this next hand, I look down at 10-8 of clubs and face a $60 open from Matt on my direct right. This hand is a little bit too weak to flat call, so I think it's best to raise or fold. This time I make it 200 and he calls. Flop comes ace queen 10 with 2 hearts. He checks, I bet small, and he calls. Turn is the 4 of hearts, bringing in the flush. This time I just check it back, and we go to an interesting river card, the 6 of hearts, putting 4 hearts on the board. He checks it a 3rd time, and now I think it's a perfect spot to bet, as I could easily have a bunch of hands that contain the king or queen of hearts. So I place a bet of $350, and we get a fold. At this point, it was around 2 in the morning, and the game is starting to break, so here's the last hand of the night. I get king 7 on the button, suited, of course, make it $50, and get called by the small blind and the straddle. The flop is perfectly in tune with how today has gone so far. Jack 9-5, all clubs. Checks to me, I bet 50 again, and only the small blind makes the call. Turn is a good card. The 8 of hearts probably improves his hand somehow, so when he checks again, I bet $250, and once again he makes the call. River is the queen of diamonds, and for a 3rd time he checks it over. At this point in the night, he's probably not folding a straight or even 2 pair, so I place one last bet to the tune of $800, and after some deliberation, he calls. So yeah, this session was unbelievable. Every value bet got called, every bluff got a fold. One of those rare nights, you know? But of course, every session comes to an end eventually, for better or worse. And shortly after this hand, the game ended up breaking. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands. So yes, quite the eventful weekend of poker. The first day I won a whopping $271. Second day was much better though. Ended up cashing out for almost an $8,000 profit. No complaints whatsoever to be had about that. And I guess that's it for today's session. But like I promised earlier in the video, I wanted to do a little bit of an FAQ. So I guess I'll start with this question. And I'll try to be quick. I know no one wants to hear me ramble too much, but the question is, how did you get into poker? And what happened was, a few years ago, I was in university. I was delivering pizzas part-time for work, just a little bit of side money. And that job didn't end up working out. At the time, I was also really interested in this guy, Andrew Neem, on YouTube, whoever that was. He was making poker videos, and I was sort of developing an interest in that game. I really like puzzle games like chess and Sudoku, and so poker just sort of naturally appealed to my interests. And you know, I had like $1,000, so I figured, why don't I go to the casino and try it? Obviously that didn't work out. I lost all my money, but I was instantly hooked on it. So I started to learn it and try to get a little bit better, and that's kind of how I began. Now, of course, I was trash at the game, which segues nicely into the next question, which is, how did you go up in stakes? Well, I just played a lot and I tried my hardest to learn. I'm still trying pretty hard to learn on a regular basis. I've just always sort of been a geek and a nerd for trying to get better at games. There's really no shortcut, or at least I don't think there is. I just played a bunch of 1-3 until I started beating it, and then I, tried 2-5, got whacked for a while, kept trying 2-5, and then eventually got more comfortable in that, and so on. I guess this also ties nicely into bankroll. A lot of people ask me what bankroll I recommend for whatever stakes, and I really don't like answering that question because there's so many variables, including, how big is the game you play, because not all 2-5s are built the same, for example, or do you have other sources of income? How much savings do you have? Is there a family or a wife or children who depend on you? All these things are going to have an impact on that answer, but the very rough guideline I like to go by is 10,000 big blinds for whatever game you're playing. So you can do the math. If you're trying to play 2-5, then 10,000 big blinds at the $5 big blind level would be $50,000. That's what I think is best anyway. It's a little bit conservative, but I've never been a huge fan of risk. And I guess the last thing I could cover today is my 2021 results as far as poker goes. Nothing incredible, I guess you could say. And that's only due to that massive downswing I had a couple of months ago when I played on some really big streamed games. I lost like 80,000, something like that, in a matter of 3 weeks. Not recommended. However, since then, maybe I'll include a graph right here. Take a look at this. Since this massive downswing, I've been on the most insane heater that I've ever had in poker. I guess that's just how it goes. In totals though, 2021 has been very good, and hopefully we can replicate something like that next year. And speaking of next year, let me share some plans with you guys. I'm going back to Arizona, Talking Stick specifically, because their state laws just switched from spread limit to no limit. I want to be a part of that. Seems like a good time to go. So that's where the vlog is headed. I'm also going to be back on the Hustler live streams, playing some pretty big games in a couple of weeks. I'm just going to keep trying in that game until I win. You know, I can't lose every time, right? And lastly, I will also be going back to Texas at some point in the next month or two. And yeah, I think that's all I got for vlog 100, guys. Thanks to everyone who's been supporting me. It's crazy to think that like 80,000 people or something like that want to watch me play cards. It still baffles me, but I got nothing but love for you guys, and hopefully the channel just continues to grow. And that 5100 no limit session, that's coming at some point.